Do you hear me? Abenazir?
Yes.
You are the only one probably waiting. Shall I have to wait a little bit more, the other ones?
Okay, I'll wait.
Yes, you can wait for them.
Huh?
You can wait for them.
Okay, because I quit from the system. It was stuck on the system and it is required to quit the system all and then come back again. This is online lecturing. How we are doing, I don't know. Always, sometimes we are having this. I will wait a little bit more. If you have any question about this, then ask me. If don't, then I will go. Do you have any question or have you understood?
I don't have any questions.
You don't have any question? Do you want me to go on? Yes. Okay, I will go on. So the consumer surplus, producer surplus, as I mentioned to you, is depending to the price policy. If the price is below below the equilibrium, it is after the trade, of course. It is contributing to the consumer surplus. If it is above the equilibrium, it is reducing the consumer surplus and it is increasing, enlarging the producer surplus. And this means there are some resource transfer from consumers to producers. Then the price is going up and, of course, contributing to the surplus for the producers, contributing some resource transfer to the producers. Therefore, it is not good for the economy. It is better to manage consumer surplus and producer surplus together for maintaining the similar surplus, or at least enlarging and increasing the bilaterally consumer and producer surplus for the welfare economics. Otherwise, it is only consumers suffering when the price going up, and of course producer gain is enlarged and increase is not good for the economy, because this will cause some welfare loss in the economy, is not good. As it is illustrated here, if it is above the equilibrium, is not good because it is transferring some resources from consumers to the producers. As it is illustrated here, the upper part of this triangle is reducing the surplus and it is not good for the economy. As you are observing here, above the red horizontal line is the consumer surplus reduction, which is reduced to the small right angle triangle. It was before at the intersection of the supply and demand curve, and after the trade it is enlarged and increased. The consumer surplus is reduced to the world price, where it is increased, and of course reduced the consumer surplus is not good for the economy because this is some welfare loss for the consumers. And as you see here, before trade it was A plus B, and after trade it is only A area is given to the consumers. And after trade, as you observe here, before trade for the producer it was only C, and after trade it is enlarged to C plus B plus D for the producers, and it is of course some resource transfer realized from consumers to producers, and it is not good for the economy. As I mentioned to you, we have to manage bilateral or both parties preference and interests for enlarging the welfare in the nation, because only supporting the entrepreneur and producer is not good for the economy. We have to manage for creating sustainable model for enlarging and increasing the welfare in the nation. As you see here, we have mentioned this should be exported for reducing this much of support to the consumers. It should be reduced below to the equilibrium level, at least for managing the similar welfare. Otherwise, it is not good for the economy if it is maintained at that level where the world price is higher than the equilibrium and increasing and enlarging the producer again and reducing the consumer welfare. This is not good for the economy. If you have any question, you ask me. If you don't, then I will go further. As it is illustrated here, consumer surplus before trade is A plus B, and after trade is only A for the consumer, and before trade for the producer surplus it was C, and after trade it is B plus C plus D, and it is of course contributing to the resource transfer from consumers to producers. As you see here, B plus D is transferred to the producer. Therefore, it is not good because we are reducing the welfare in the economy. The people's welfare is reduced. And if it is below the equilibrium, as it is illustrated here, then we have, of course, some resource transfer now from producers to the consumers. And it is, of course, a little bit better, but not good again for the economy, because now the producers suffering because the producer price is reduced after the trade, and of course the world price is supposed to be lower than the domestic market price, and this will then cause some production reduction for the economy, which is realized at I will give you the areas because it's not given there. As you see here, the import which is realized is reducing the welfare for the producers and of course increasing the consumer welfare. Now you are understanding the consumer is enjoying to enlarge and increase their welfare from A plus B plus D, from A to A plus B plus D, and producer is reducing their welfare from C plus B to only C, which is not good for the producer. Therefore, we have to manage such trade policy and price policy for realizing the price mechanism around the equilibrium, which is not causing any problem or any parties suffering in the economy. And it is of course good to maintain the equilibrium price level. Sustainable model is preferred always at the level of this equilibrium where it is consumer and producer surplus is maintained. Otherwise, as you observe here, consumer surplus before trade it was A, and after trade it is enlarged to A plus B plus D, and producer surplus is reduced to C, where it was before B plus C. This is not good for the economy, as I mentioned to you, because the producer's production operation process is reduced, and this is of course not good for the economy. The part which is imports will cover and of course realize in the economy from the outside of the market, and this will be imported from the other markets towards to our domestic market, and this will then covered with the importable goods. But on the other side, this trade relations reducing the prices below the equilibrium and causing some transfer from producer to consumer, and it is not good, as I mentioned to you, for the economy. And finally, when we are looking to the table, before trade, consumer surplus, it was 8, and after trade, it is increased to A plus B plus D because the price is reduced here. And producer surplus, it was B plus C, and now it's going to be C only. And there is, of course, some reduction on the producer surplus, which is the B area is excluded from the producer surplus, and total surplus is supposed to be A plus B plus C before trade, and after trade is going to be A plus B plus C plus D, which is included results of this importable goods. The area D is contribution of the importable goods from the other economies. The effects of the tariffs, we are of course questioning again to see how it is going to affect and change. Let's look on this graphic. We suppose the price without tariff is realized well below the equilibrium, but after tariff, sorry, the price is shifted a little bit higher, and as you are understanding, this is good for the economy because it is preventing the production in the domestic market. Because if we don't put any tariff to the external producers when they are trying to access to our markets, this will definitely reduce our producer production to well below to the Q1, where it is illustrated with Q1S. As you see on the table, on the graphic, is very, very low production in the domestic market. And if we are shifting this price level, results of the tariff or tax, it is shifted a little bit higher, and it is of course enlarging now the production as it is illustrated here, QS2, which is a little bit more production capacity enlarged results of this tariff, which means the external producers who are trying to access to our market will pay more tax, and on the other side, the domestic market and producer will enjoy to produce more production, which is shifted from Q1S or QS1 to QS2, which is shifting the production delta QS, where the production in domestic market is enlarged, and on the other side, results of this tariff and tax, the tax is reducing and causing some consumer welfare and reducing it from QD1 to QD2, which is normally expected if we want to enlarge our domestic market and domestic producers production and maintaining internal production, and of course not depending too much to the outside, then it is required to put some tariff or tax to the system for increasing and bringing the market towards to the equilibrium level. Otherwise, this is not good for the economy because internal producers is supposed suffering. I hope you are understanding because I am trying to explain you comprehensively, because this is very interesting and very sometimes complicated topics, because we are going to build on this stuff, our knowledge, and if you don't understand these things very well, you will not understand the following topics either. Then, as you see, the importable goods is reduced from QS1, QD1 to QS2, QS2 to QD2, where it is reduce and limit the import with the tariff. And this is good because as you are observing, the importable goods is now reduced, but the tariff is increasing and shifting the price little bit higher level and bringing the market towards to the equilibrium, because we are desiring to having some market at equilibrium level. If we don't have this, then this is of course problem for the economy. And as you are observing here, the producer surplus before tariff is very, very small. This right angle triangle, this blue area is very low, as you see, but after, and of course the consumer surplus is very high, as you see this large blue triangle, the right angle triangle, which is given now, is the consumer surplus, and it is not acceptable because there is very, very small production in the market, and there is huge amount of surplus, consumer surplus in the market, which is expected to be covered with the imported goods, because the consumer demand is realized at QD1 and the production in the domestic market is only QS1, which is very, very low, and the between area should be imported. This QS1 and QD1 should be imported from the other economies for covering the needs of the consumers, which is not acceptable. We have to shift this price to the higher level for reducing this demand capacity of the consumers, and of course increasing the production in the internal market, because we don't like to become more dependent to the other economies. If we are becoming very, very dependent to the other economies, to the other nations' economies and nations' production, then we are always becoming very weak in the challenging power, and we don't have any challenging power in the international platforms. Therefore, consumer surplus is supposed to be very high, but it should be covered with the imported goods, and it is not acceptable, as I said to you. We have to increase this production with putting some tariff, some barriers in front of the importable goods for reducing this import capacity from QS1 to QS1, QD1 to QS2 to QD2. Then this is, of course, creating more space for the production. As you are observing now, the consumer surplus is reduced a little bit to AB area, and the producer surplus is also enlarged, as it is illustrated here, G plus Z area, and G plus C area is the enlargement. The C is the enlargement of the producer surplus, results of this tariff, and of course, as you see, the import capacity and amount is now reduced from QS1, QD1 to QS2 to QD2, and this is good for the economy, because now the economy will enjoy to collect some tariff, some tax, the government, and of course production will enlarge and increase, and the dependency of the economy is reduced to QS2 to QD2, and of course the consumer producer surplus is enlarged, and of course consumer surplus is also reduced, which is expected results, because it was very high, which is dependent to the foreign economies. We cannot accept and afford such economical application when there is a huge amount of scarcity in the economy. Is not acceptable. And the E area is the collected amount of the tax which is distributed to the government or to the agency or to the public services. As you see here, the G plus C now is after tax or tariff is the producer surplus, A plus B is the consumer surplus, and E area is the government revenue or collected tax by the government is supposed to be realized with the rectangular E area. And as you see, the import is now reduced, and D and F is the deadweight loss, which is disappear from the economy. We don't know where it is going to be because of results of this tax and tariff application. Some economical resources is disappeared, is normal. As I have mentioned to you, it is depending this elasticity problem in the economy. If the collected amount of the elasticity, if you remember the former lectures, if the demand is more elastic, there is more loss in the economy, and if demand is less elastic, there is of course less loss in the economy. And if there is less elastic supply, there is of course less supply loss and less loss in the economy. And if large tax is applied and large loss is realized, this means there is more elastic supply in the economy. Therefore, we have to refresh our knowledge from the former classes, from the chapter 7 and 8, for being able to understand this chapter 9. And when we are looking again to the table, the consumer surplus, it was before tax or tariff, is A plus B plus C plus D plus E plus F, and after tax is going to be reduced to A plus B only, and the change or the reduction on the consumer surplus is the area C plus D plus E plus F. And the producer surplus, it was only G before tax or tariff, and after tariff, it is going to increase to C plus G, and the change is only the area C. And the government revenue is nothing before tariff, because if you don't collect any tax, the government will not get anything. And after the revenue or after the tax application, the revenue is going to be created, and it is the area, rectangular area is the A, and the government revenue is the change. Results of this change is only the E area. Therefore, D and F, as I said to you, is the showing or representing the debt weight, which is the loss of the economy. We don't know where it is going to be because of this elasticity problem in the economy. Sometimes it is created, and as I mentioned to you, if the demand is more elastic, more loose, and if less elastic, then it's of course less loose. Similarly, for the supply is also realized same direction: more elastic, more loose, less elastic supply, less loose is supposed to be realized. If you remember the former chapters that I have illustrated and shown to you. The effects of import quota. Now we are looking to the quota. The quota is very important in the economy, because quota means you have to put some quantity restriction to the economy. And when you are putting such quantity restriction to the economy, as it is illustrated here, then this will then limit your production. This limit your import with this amount, which is going to be fixed and put into the system. As you see, the import quotas without quotas, the import without quotas is the amount of QS1 and QS2, and if it is increased, the quota is of course increasing the production and of course reducing the importable goods, which is expected to become with this red line, the domestic supply plus import supply, which is realized results of quota, is illustrated with this red colored line. And as you see, now the import with quota is restricted and reduced as the former tax tariff application to QS2 to QD2. And this is of course good. Either you are going to put some quota or you are going to put some tariff. It is depending to the economical application and of course preferences of the economy or the governments. And if you put such quotas, this will definitely contribute to your economy and enlarge your production and of course reduce your dependency to the other nations. The equilibrium with quota is realized now well below to the former position where it is without trade and without quota realized. If you have any question, you don't have to hesitate. You don't hesitate. Ask me any question. I can explain once again. As I said to you, the quota shift this domestic production higher level and enlarging it and bringing the economy to the better position where the price level is reduced, but the supply side of the economy is of course enjoying this enlargement, and of course restriction realized here for the supply and of course for the demand also, but it is somehow positive direction and positive impact to the economy is expected because dependency is now reduced. As you see, the imports without quota, it was very high, and imports with quota is restricted and limited with QS2 and QD2. And this is good for the economy, as I said to you, because on the one side you are enlarging your domestic production, and on the other side you are limiting your imports with this quota amount. And this is then of course good for your economy, which is shifting your prices of course to the lower level, but of course increasing your economical production operation process to the new equilibrium level. Now as you see, the surplus is A plus B plus C, This is the surplus, and E is the amount of the collection, and D and F is the debt rate, and G is supposed to be the the producer surplus, which is expected to increase to G plus C after reduction. As you see here, again, consumer surplus is A plus B plus C plus D plus E dash double dash and plus if is the consumer surplus, and after quota is reduced to A plus B only, as you see here, because of the quota, and the producer surplus, it was G, and it is increased to C plus G, and the change is negative. C plus D plus E dash and E double dash plus F is going to be reduced from the consumer surplus, which is expected because consumer surplus was very high, as you are observing here, and it should be reduced because such a huge amount of surplus for the consumer and such a small amount of producer surplus or gain is not expected, because this is not a sustainable model for the economy, because there is a huge amount of scarcity and dependency to the other economies, and we have to do something. We have to put some barriers to the economy, to the foreigners, to the exporters, to the outsiders to export or to import the imports to our country should be reduced for maintaining sustainable model. And as I said to you, the total surplus is A plus B plus C plus D plus E dash plus E double dash plus F plus G is the surplus, and after the quota is supposed to be A plus B plus C plus E double dash plus G is the after quota total surplus, and minus D and minus F is the debt rate, as I mentioned to you in the former graphic either. These purple areas is the debt rate, and E is the collection of the government probably or agencies, and A plus B is the consumer surplus after the quota, and C plus G is the producer gain in a given scenario. If you have any question, please ask me. If you don't, I will jump to the other chapter with the applications, and you will understand better. Do you have any question? You don't have any question?
No.
No question?
Yes, sir.
No question. Oh, okay. I will go to the next chapter with examples, with applications. Then you will understand. Okay, consumer surplus and producer surplus with examples you will understand now better. Let's give some theoretical applications first and definitions for being able to understand what was consumer surplus. The consumer surplus is the consumer surplus where the maximum price willing is going to be excluded from the actual prices, or so-called is used to calculate the consumer surplus by taking the difference of the highest consumers would pay and the actual price they pay, which is the highest mean zero quantity, so-called the maximum price, which you don't afford and you don't want to buy anything. Therefore, this is of course the triangle that we are talking about, where we are going to calculate with the triangle H multiplied with base divided 2 is the triangle formula. Then you will get this of course either with the triangle formula, or you can calculate it by the consumer surplus as the maximum price willing, which is going to be excluded from the actual price, then will be multiplied with the quantity sold, and will gives you the amount of the let's say money which is going to be collected or given to the consumer surplus. As it is illustrated here, the orange colored triangle is the consumer surplus, and the highest price is the price where it is the consumer so-called demand curve intersect the price, and of course where the intersection between supply and demand is realized is going to be calculated with the quantity, which is the intersection point of the supply and demand at the equilibrium level, will be multiplied with the amount of the money which is intersect the equilibrium. If you're going to subtract the highest price where intersect this blue demand curve, the vertical price, and where the equilibrium price is realized, if you subtract the highest price from the equilibrium price, you will get the vertical line for the triangle, and then below you will have so-called the height of this triangle will be the multiplied with the base where the quantity, amount of the quantity is. Then it's going to be divided 2, will give you the amount of the consumer surplus. The opposite can be done for the producer surplus, for being able to estimate and calculate the producer surplus either. Therefore, producer surplus and consumer surplus is going to be estimated by calculating these triangles or using this triangle formula where height multiplied base divided 2 from the geometry, you know. Okay, in practice, we have another example. A shopper is determined to buy a laptop with 1.9 gigahertz and 15 so-called centimeter screen is willing to be spent or buy or used for $1,000 is sacrificed. But she browsed through various electronics stores and she find one for $600. That meets all her exact criteria. 1.9 gigahertz and 15 centimeter screen is only $600. Therefore, if you are going to look this example without any calculation, you are understanding the benefit or so-called the surplus for this consumer, which is ready to sacrifice $1,000 for buying such 1.9 gigahertz and of course 15 centimeter screen laptop, and is only paid $600 for being able to buy this. Then of course $400 is supposed to be surplus in a given example. Therefore, without any calculation and many graphical illustration, you are able to suggest $400 is the consumer surplus in this given example. You are understanding, hopefully. And then when we are looking to this large scale model, the demand curve are highly valuable in measuring consumer surplus in terms of the market as a whole. A demand curve on a demand supply graph depicts the relationship between the price of the product and the quantity of the product demanded at the price. And due to the law of diminishing marginal utility, the demand curve is downward sloping, as I mentioned to you from the former first class. And the orange shaded part is illustrated graph presented above represents the consumer surplus, as I mentioned to you here. Therefore, if you are putting such estimations on the graphic, you will easily find this with the, as I mentioned to you, triangle formula where it is height multiplied base divided 2 will gives you this surplus. And as it is given here, the consumer surplus is equal to 1/2 because we have a triangle here is multiplied with the QD, where is the quantity sold, and delta P is the where the price changes between the highest price and the equilibrium price is going to give you the delta price or the differentiation of the price. And this will then, of course, giving you the surplus for the economy, for the consumers. Therefore, it is advised to use always geometrical applications and geometrical calculations for estimating the surplus with easily and without any difficulties, without any mathematical and of course without any econometrical applications, because you can use some geometrical applications for estimating surplus without integrating or differentiating this models, because in the following chapters we have some differentiations and some integrations, which I am not going to introduce to you because you are in the first class and it will be probably difficult to you, but you can use such geometrical applications, such verticals, so-called squares, rectangular or triangles, right angle triangles. Estimation will be easily estimated without problem, I think, if you know some geometry. And on the other side, the equation is the producer surplus is, of course, the inverse equation can be estimated, which is given to you for the consumer surplus, can be used for the producer, which is the inverse shaped right angle triangle. And you will notice in the chart above with the graphic that I have mentioned to you, there is another economic metric called the producer surplus, which is the difference between the minimum price, now the minimum price, of course, for the producers, and of course the equilibrium price will be subtracted now for getting the price, also called the delta price, or the differentiation of the price difference. And in a perfect world, there may be an equilibrium price where both consumers and producers have a surplus. They are both better off, as opposed to a situation where only one side benefits. Because as I mentioned to you, any parties in this direction is getting some preferences and of course contributing to the economy results of these price changes. If the tax is very high, is of course consumer surplus is reduced, and if it is low, then the of course producer gain is low or reduced. Therefore, you have to learn to manage these things carefully. And the producer surplus in a practical applications, in a theoretical market for bottled water, a customer is willing to pay $10 for the bottled water, which is the highest among other customers. Most customers are only willing to pay $5, which is coincidentally the price that is set when demand meets supply exactly. At $5, 20 bottles are supplied and the consumer surplus is $50. Therefore, this means shared among the customers who bought the 20 bottles of water, there are $50 in a saving that can go towards purchases. When we are looking to this graphical illustration, you will understand better. Consumer surplus, producer surplus, and social surplus is given here, and you will understand how it is going to be distributed in an economical aspect. Consider a market for tablet computers as shown in a figure 1. We usually think a demand curve as showing what quantity of some product consumers will buy at any price. But a demand curve can also be read the other ways. If we choose a quantity of output, the demand curve shows the maximum price, and consumers will be willing to pay for the quantity. According to the demand curve in a given figure below, as you are observing here, if producers wanted to sell a quantity of 20 million tablets, some customers are willing to pay 90, each at point J. In other words, a tablet is worth 90 to those customers, because as you are observing here, at point J, where 20 units of tablet computers is going to be sold, the amount or the price is supposed to be $90, which is a reasonable price and a little bit higher than the equilibrium price. And this means the people who are ready to buy quantity, 20 units of tablets for this price, or at $90 is of course a little bit higher than the expected equilibrium price, and is of course not the desired demand capacity observed. Therefore, we have to manage to reduce the price below to the equilibrium, at least to the equilibrium level, for maintaining reasonable price level for the economy. However, that doesn't mean those customers who will end up paying $90, it is going to be shown on the figure, is supposed to be reduced now 80, and the equilibrium quantity is 28. As you see now, we are assuring and we are securing this equilibrium price, where the quantity is 28 units now sold by the producer, and of course consumer prefer to buy the same amount of quantity at $8. And this is then of course equilibrium price, where the supplier and demanders quantity supplied and quantity demanded is in equilibrium, and is of course meet at a perfectly deal realized at the price each customers who would have been willing to pay 94 tablets is getting a good deal, but it is of course not the perfect deal. As I mentioned to you, it is a little bit higher than the equilibrium price. The good deal is should be, you have to also exercise this, when you get something for less than you think it's worth. This is the good deal for your life. You have to get always. That's the reason the seasonal discounts and seasonal reductions always increasing the demand capacity. Even if the price is sometimes going up and is of course showing to the price or the etiquettes or the tickets as a decrease or as a reduction, as a let's say discount, you are preferring to buy, even if it is of course not the exactly the cheaper price, but since it is written that there is a discount price for this, then you are going to prefer and buy such products with a preferable, reasonable, cheaper prices. We don't have to stop there. If suppliers choose to produce only 14 tablets, as it is illustrated on the graphic point K, as you see here, which is lower level and very, very small amount of quantity tablet is produced, and at $40, of course, is not desired level for the supplier. As you see here, now the supply side is suffering and the demand is very high here, and it is not acceptable. Therefore, we can't afford and we can't supply such position where the supply is very low and demand is very high. Therefore, the demand curve to see that some customers would have been willing to pay about $115 for each tablet at the quantity produced, where it is of course not affordable. As you see here, at 14 units quantity which is produced, the supply side is supposed to be $40, but the demand is very high because of this, and the price is expected to shift to 115, as it is, as if you vertical line through 14 to K to the upper to the demand curve, you will intersect this 115, sorry, and it is of course not acceptable for the economy because you have limited amount of production, and of course high demand is increasing the price to the equilibrium level, above the equilibrium level. This is not acceptable economical model. Therefore, either we have to find a reasonable market price. That's the reason we are always calling invisible hand determining the price mechanism. If the price is very low, the demand is going to be very high, and this is then shifting the economy to the higher level. If the demand is very low and the price is very high, this is again opposite. The price is expected to become lower level. Therefore, this is the, of course, classical economical approach where the invisible hand is always playing very important role for managing this market price and of course determining the price in the market without any intervention. But if you're going to intervene, then of course it is of course shifting and increasing, sometimes upper level or sometimes downwards. Price mechanism is realized and of course affecting and changing the economy. As it is illustrated here, the demand curve below is showing the equilibrium where it is realized at 80 units and where the 828 units of tablet is going to be sold in equilibrium. And this is then of course the demand curve at any quantity which is shown for some consumers think those tablets are worth. We can formalize this idea of how good a deal consumers get a transaction using this concept, which is the consumer surplus. Above the triangle or above the equilibrium is the consumer surplus, and below the equilibrium price, and of course the point E where intersect and $80 is offered for the equilibrium price is the producer surplus, therefore equally so-called distributed when this is realized. And it is always better and preferable price level where the consumer surplus and producer surplus equally or somehow similar amount distributed and of course given, because we want to increase the consumer welfare and of course producer gain either. Since a demand curve traces or shows consumers' willingness to pay for different quantities, we can define the gain to consumers as the difference between what they would have been willing to pay and the price that they will actually pay. At point J, as I mentioned to you, consumers willing to pay $90, but they were able to purchase tablets at the equilibrium price at $80. So the gain here is $10. As you see, now the consumer surplus is enlarged because it was ready to pay $90. But as I mentioned to you, results of this equilibrium price, it is reduced to $80. And now the consumer surplus is enjoy and enlarged 10 units or $10. And this is, of course, good for the economy because consumer surplus is supposed to be enlarged when the equilibrium price is realized. And this is exactly analog to the profit Bill earned from buying apples that we described in the previous page of the reading. As I mentioned to you, in a given example, we are assuring these prices where they are ready to pay and they are, of course, actually ready to pay with $80 is the preferable price and, of course, increasing the consumer surplus. If we add up the gains at every quantity, we can measure the consumer surplus, as I mentioned to you, as much as it is increasing and enlarging towards the horizontal axis. And it should be enlarged and increased in this direction for enlarging and increasing the consumer surplus, and vice versa is also realized for the producer surplus. As much as we are increasing and enlarging the producer gain means the right angle triangle where the supply curve is realized and of course parallel, not parallel, intersect this right y axis, then will gives you the higher level producer gain where the price is increased and enlarged and of course create more gain to the producer, because producer is profit oriented and as much as the price goes up, this will increase and enlarge the producer gain and of course the surplus. The supply curve shows, as I mentioned to you, the quantity of the films willing to supply at each price. For example, point K on the graphic which I illustrated is of course supposed to be 40 million tablets or 40 units tablets is supposed to be affordable, and of course at price level 45 is preferred, which is very low and of course not acceptable for the economy because this is well below the equilibrium level. And of course producer were instead able to charge the equilibrium price at 80 where it is the equilibrium, clearly receiving an extra benefit beyond when they require to supply the product, which is increase and shift the equilibrium price and of course the quantity to the $80 and of course quantity which is to 28 million or unit is affordable. The amount the seller is paid for good is minus the seller's actual cost is the producer surplus. Therefore, if it is supposed to be at 45 and it is realized in the market $80, then this area between 45 to 80 is the surplus for the producer, because as much as price going up, this will increase and enlarge the economical aspect and of course the producer gain. The social surplus, of course, is the total amount of these two surpluses, the consumer surplus and of course producer surplus. The net gain of this society is the area between the supply curve and the demand curve. That is the sum of the producer surplus and the consumer surplus. We call this social surplus because bilaterally consumer surplus and producer surplus is already realized here. And as it is illustrated on the graphic of figure 1, the total amount of this surplus areas for producers and for consumers is going to give this social surplus. We show the social surplus, as I mentioned to you, as the area F plus G is the social surplus is larger at the equilibrium quantity price than it would be at any other quantity. Therefore, as much as you are enlarging this, this will then shift and increase this area as it is illustrated here. The producer surplus is here and consumer surplus is also here. When you are looking to this surplus, you will understand here, you see at point 10 where the, you see point 10 or dollar or unit, the producer surplus and of course consumer surplus intersect each other where equilibrium price is realized. And when you are going to calculate this 10 to 25 multiplied with 3 will 25 minus 10 multiplied 3 will gives you 45 for the consumer surplus, and from 5 to 10 is going to 5 multiplied with 3 is going to give you the producer surplus is 15. Therefore, you are going to easily estimate the social surplus. 15 plus 45 is going to be the social surplus, which is 60. Then the surplus estimation is the sample market. I have already quickly done this, but you will understand here very step by step. Is the sample market shown in the graph. Equilibrium price is 10 and the equilibrium quantity is the 3 units, and the consumer surplus area is highlighted above the equilibrium price. The area can be calculated as the area of the triangle. Recall that to find the area of triangle, you will need to know its base and height, as I mentioned to you for the right angle triangle formula. When you are going to calculate this, height is 3 and 4 is the base, then you can calculate easily. 3 multiplied 4 divided 2 is going to be 6, which is 12 over 2. 12 over 2 is 6. Then you will get this surplus for this triangle here, not for the former example, but for the triangle here. The surplus is 6 unit. For the former example, when we are looking here, let's apply this to the calculation for the area of triangle to our example market to see the added value that the consumers will get for this item at the equilibrium price in our sample markets. Define the base and height of the consumer surplus triangle and find, of course, surplus and social surplus together and producer surplus together. The base of the consumer surplus triangle is 3, as I mentioned to you. And of course, you have to carefully calculate the height of this triangle while you are attempting and trying to find the maximum point where it is 25, and of course the intersection point of the equilibrium where it is 10. Then you are going to subtract from each other, it is 15. Therefore, height is 15 because you are going to subtract from 25 the highest point of the price from the intersection point from the equilibrium price. 10 is going to give you the 15. Then you will get this 15 for the height and 3 for the base. When you're going to multiply this, 15 multiplied 3 is 45. When you're going to divide it 2, then you will get 22.5, where it is, of course, the surplus, producer surplus. And as you see here, we have here another graphic for corn flour. What is the producer surplus is asking here. As you see here, we have again the intersection price or the equilibrium price is 3. The intersection price for the supplier is 1, and the total amount for the produce is 2,000. Then again here, 3 minus 1 is 2 multiplied 2,000. Then you will have producer surplus. When you're going to divide it 2 is going to be 2,000 for the producer surplus. And when you're going to look to the upper part for the consumer surplus, 7 minus 3 is 4 multiplied with 2,000 is again 4,000 for consumer surplus, and 4,000 multiplied 2,000 will give you the 6,000 for social surplus for this some simplest economical model. If you have any question, you ask me. Once again, consumer surplus, as I mentioned to you, maximum price willing to pay minus actual price, market price, will give you the surplus if you're going to multiply this with the quantity in a given model and divide it 2. And the consumer surplus, again, 1/2 multiplied quantity demanded multiplied P maximum minus PD, where it is, of course, the equilibrium price realized, and you will have this consumer surplus easily without any problem, because as I mentioned to you, for the right angle triangle, height multiplied base divided 2 will give you the surplus for the producer and for the consumer together. And the producer surplus, similarly, 1/2 multiplied for the price, which is given to the economy, so-called the delta price, is going to be subtracted from the quantity produced in the equilibrium. The market price minus minimum price to sell will be sold multiplied with the quantity sold. Then this will gives you the producer surplus if you're going to divide it to the 2. Therefore, you have to determine these things very carefully when you are going to apply to the, of course, calculation. It is not difficult. It is very simplest estimations. Again, here it is given 8 is the intersection point, 20 is the highest price, 20 minus 8 is 12, 12 multiplied with 6 is going to give you 72, divided 2 is going to give you the surplus, consumer surplus, 36. And below area, 2 is the minimum price for the producer and 8 is the equilibrium price. 8 minus 2 is 6, 6 multiplied 6 is 36, divided 2 is 18, and 36 plus 18 is going to be 54. This is then the total benefit, also called the social benefit or social surplus, is realized again in this example. And once again, the surplus is the yellow shaded area here. And when you want to calculate this, you have to find first this QD is equal to 80 minus 5P is equal to so-called supply curve is minus 24 plus 8P. If you're going to equalize this, you will find the P equilibrium and Q equilibrium. And when you are finding the Q equilibrium and P equilibrium where it is 8, it is calculated, and it is 40, then you will be easily estimating the consumer surplus when you are giving 0 for the QD, and P when it is given to 0, you will get the Q intersection point where 0 price is realized. If you give price 0, you will get the intersection point for the quantity, and when you are going to give the quantity 0, you will get the price for the 0 quantity. Therefore, you will easily estimate 18 and 80 here, as it is illustrated here. Then you will calculate easily the consumer surplus and producer surplus without any problem, because you have now the equilibrium price, equilibrium quantity, you have the intersection point for the price and for the quantity, and also for the supply and demand, you have the intersection points. Then you can find easily without any problem. If you have any question, please ask me. I will explain to you. If you don't, then I will go further. As I mentioned to you, producer surplus is the difference between what producers are willing and able to supply a good for and able to supply a good for and the price they actually receive. And producer supply shown by area above the supply curve and below the market price. As I mentioned to you, A is the intersection point for the supply where the intercept is 0. When the 0 quantity is afford or realized, and of course you don't have to find the other highest price, because highest price is realized for the demand, And here you have to find the equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity for finding the producer surplus. And similarly for the consumer, you have to find the zero price and zero quantity amounts for intersection each other, and then being able to find the consumer surplus either. As it is illustrated here, the consumer surplus is red area is given because we have here tax applied, I think. And as you see here, you have to calculate every area, every triangle separately and then add each other. As you see, there is a red figure, red area, which you have to first calculate the rectangular area first, and then, I mean, this 16 minus 8 multiplied with 20 is going to calculate the rectangular area, and then you will calculate the upper right angled red area, which is 20 minus 16 is going to be 4 multiplied 20 divided 2. Then you will find this red area, and then you're going to calculate this green area, and then you will calculate the blue area total. Then you will find all together for the consumer surplus, which is the red area, as I mentioned to you, because there is a tax application here. We suppose, because as I said to you, after the tax application, the price is going from 8 to 16, and this is then, of course, required to find the consumer surplus, where the debt weight, the red area, so-called green area, is realized. The green area, as I mentioned to you, is 20 minus 40 minus 20 is multiplied with 16 minus 8, because as I mentioned to you, this is the price for the height base multiplied and divided 2. Then you will find the debt weight area, this green area, and the total surplus as it is given here after calculating the producer surplus, which is the blue area. Again, the height base multiplied and divided to 2 will give you the 40 units for the blue area. And for consumer surplus, I mentioned to you, you have to calculate first the rectangular area, which is 20 minus 16 divided 2 and multiplied with 20. Then will gives you this first area, this first triangle, the upper area, and then you are going to calculate this rectangular 16 minus 8 multiplied against 20 minus 0 is 20 units, because quantity sold is calculated and is going to be divided again 0.5. Then you will get 200, which is, sorry, this is a rectangle, not a triangle. Then you don't have to divide it 2. Then you will have 200 for the consumer surplus and 40 for the producer surplus. And when you're going to add this together, then you will have this total surplus 240, and that weight here is the green area, 80 units is going to be distributed for the example. And consumer surplus is the total amount saved by consumers who are willing to pay more than market price for product, yet are able to purchase the product for the market price. And producer surplus is the amount gained by producers who are willing to receive less for product than market price, yet actually receive market price for the product. And the tax is the amount of money which is going to be paid for the product offered or estimated by the agencies or government. Once again, here we have here another example for being able to secure your knowledge. The green area is the consumer surplus, the purple area is the tax amount which is distributed to the government, and the pink area is the, of course, producer surplus, and the white triangles T and W is the debt weight or the loss. Again, R is the consumer surplus, S plus U is the tax collected by the government, V is the government, producer gain, and T plus V is the debt weight, which is distributed to the somewhere else. We don't know what is happening. This is the loss of the economy. Therefore, as much as you are increasing the price, you see the debt weight is enlarging, increasing. Therefore, it is not good. The debt weight T plus V is dependent to the price. If the price going up, this means the debt weight is enlarged. The loss in the economy is very high. Therefore, higher tax doesn't mean the government collection is high. It is better to determine a reasonable tax where the purple area is approaching to the equilibrium, and not the equilibrium, but at least near or somehow to the equilibrium. Because if you move towards the price vertical line and enlarge the price very high, the collected tax amount is not too much, but the surplus is very low. Producer gain is also very low, but the loss, which is illustrated with T plus V, is very high, because as much as the price goes up, as you see, the shaded area is going to be reduced, because this QT is below illustrated on the horizontal line, is going to the origin. It is going to reduce and enlarge the loss of the economy, and of course decreasing the collected amount of the tax, decreasing the consumer surplus, and decreasing the producer gain. Therefore, higher tax application is not the mean higher collection for the government. It is only damaging the economy totally, because somebody is collecting or taking this evaporated money, but we don't know what is happening in the economy. This is not good for the economy. Therefore, once again, when we are looking here, the reasonable price which is given here, it was 19 and it is shifted to the 2,210. The marginal social benefit exceeds marginal social cost and the tax is inefficient. Therefore, decreased quantity and debt weight is here realized. At least here the reasonable tax is given. As you see, now the debt weight is not too high, but the collected amount of the tax is in the purple area. The tax revenue which is collected by the government is these triangles, which is going to be illustrated with the purple area, and upper part of this blue line, blue triangle, is the consumer surplus, and below part of this blue triangle is the producer surplus, which is distributed. Therefore, you are understanding here, producer surplus and consumer surplus is protected somehow, not too high lost or excluded from the economy, but the government is also collecting some reasonable tax here, reasonable revenue, and the debt weight loss is not too high here. But if we're changing this and increasing this, this will then of course damaging the economy. If we are moving this tax to 2070, for example, probably the most of the collected amount of the tax will be in the debt weight area, and the of course consumer surplus and consumer producer surplus is going to be evaporated and very small area realized. Therefore, it is not good for the economy to have higher tax rates in the market. As you see here, A is the tax amount, A is the consumer surplus, D is the producer surplus, B plus C is the government tax, and the small triangles A and D, which is not clearly illustrated, it is this near the intersection of the equilibrium, where Q1 moves to Q2, is the debt weight loss. Once again, consumer surplus is A, B, E, producer surplus is C, D, F. This is of course prior to the tax, and after the tax is consumer surplus reduced to A, and producer surplus, so consumer surplus reduced to A, and producer surplus is also reduced to D, because there is a tax collection, and change in surplus and change in consumer surplus is illustrated and indicated with B and C here, because this is then of course collected amount of the tax which is distributed to the government. Therefore, B plus C is the government collected tax, and A after tax collected amount of the consumer surplus, and D is the collected amount of the producer surplus after tax application, which is reducing both parties, let's say, resources, but some governmental resources is collected here. Some tax revenue is collected by the government, which is, of course, good for the social economical aspect, because government need to collect some resources for realizing some public services, some creating infrastructure, hospitals, schooling, and some other infrastructure, and of course social buildings, which is required to be applied to the economy, because these things very important for the social economical model. Tax affects changes producers and consumers welfare, as I mentioned to you, and as you are observing here, producer surplus before tax application was A plus B plus C plus D, which is the equilibrium price, which is in the equilibrium price, but consumer surplus after the tax is reduced to the brown area where it is only A. And the producer surplus before tax, it was E plus F plus G, E plus F plus G, but after the producer tax, after the tax application, producer surplus is reduced to B plus F. And this is then, of course, good for the economy, because it is shifting the market a little bit higher level, but of course causing some loss for the producer surplus, which is of course damaging a little bit for the producer, but it is of course sometimes good because it creates some restriction to the economy, but sometimes it is not good if it is such a restriction and reduction realized in the economy. Therefore, it must be carefully treated for determining which point is best fitted to the economy, because as you see, tax is always shifting the price higher level, and this is then of course not good for the economy. This is creating some burden to the producer and to the consumer bilaterally if there is some transfers from this tax application. Once again, when we are looking to this oil market, which is given here, the consumer surplus is reduced results of this tax, which is in the oil market very high tax is realized, and government collection is also very high. Producer surplus